With losses continuing to pile up and the Montreal Canadiens' problems seemingly not getting as much better as we wanted, there are a lot of trade talks out there with some wild trades proposed, including landing a former 37-goal scorer from a Western Conference team and a young up-and-coming player for the Los Angeles Kings. We got to dive into all of those talks. Plus, Jesse, we got to talk a bit about the Laval Rocket goaltending situation and how one Habs insider thinks that a goalie could get called up to replace Primeau very soon, and a quick note on Lane Hutson and what led to his first NHL goal coming up in this episode of Habs Digest. But guys, haven't done this in a while. Just going to ask you quickly. Over half of you watching this video are not subscribed. We got daily Montreal Canadiens content, reactions to every game, all the latest trades, news, rumors, reports. We have weekly live streams. If you like that kind of stuff and you want to stay up to date on all things Montreal Canadiens, this is the spot to be. Hit the subscribe button down below. It's completely free and we'd really appreciate it. Let's get straight into the video. No dilly-dallying around here, Jesse. And I want to start with our boy, Lane Hutson. Do I still have the highlight? Oh yeah, that first NHL goal. NHL goal scorer Lane Hutson tied with Adam Fox in goals, a guy who he gets a lot of comparisons to, but there's more to it than just this right here. Take a note at where he shot from, those hash marks, Jesse. We got a little insight from Eric Engels, a Habs insider, on what made this goal happen. If I bring this up, so for weeks, Hutson has stepped on the ice ahead of practice with Canadiens Director of Development Adam Nicholas to work on shots from that exact location, among others. Saturday's goal was the fruit of that labor. He put in the extra time and got rewarded for it on Saturday. Lane Hutson, Jesse, that first NHL goal was amazing, but this is just another example of Adam Nicholas's name coming up, directly affecting players' production on the ice, and I love to see it.
Absolutely, and great job of kind of identifying where in the NCAA that Lane Hutson has been successful and then reproducing that, because, Josh, this is something that we can do again with Lane Hutson, and that's kind of like what's so exciting and kind of what we want to see more of. The reason why we're speaking of this today, we're talking about like that face-off win. Hudson's making that juke like we know we can just to get that space, but instead of dishing off to somebody else, taking as much space as he can, going to those hash marks, that face-off circle, and letting it rip, because there's a certain places on the ice where Lane Hutson can score, but he has that, that deceptiveness where he can get to those spaces on the ice. And we know, Josh, like for any player that wants to be elite, which is absolutely Lane Hutson's goal in the NHL, it's like they have to put in that extra work. But that's even more so when you're a little bit of a smaller guy looking to be elite. You need to put in that work behind the scenes as well. And again, Adam Nicholas doing a great job of kind of observing what works, what to really model their game on going forward. And amazing Lane Hutson, again, just all about that work on and off the ice. So really a testament to some great fruit of his labor so far.
For sure. And look, I know that's kind of the point of practice. I know that's the point of coaching. Get guys to do in practice what you wanted to see them do in game. But it's not just happened with Lane Hutson. We saw it a lot last season with Juraj Slafkovsky, and I'm sure we'll see it more this season as he continues to progress. Maybe he's just one of those guys that gets slow starts to seasons, Jesse. Maybe he's just one of those second half players, clutch players, if you will. Now that he's back on the top line, we'll see. But there's going to be a lot more happening with a bunch of different players. Cannot wait to see it pay off. And maybe this is just the floodgates opening for Lane Hutson scoring a lot more. So shout out Adam Nicholas, shout out Habs training staff, coaching staff. It's paying dividends right now. But let's move on to a guy that has not really been as good as we've wanted this season, and that's Cayden Primeau. Now, there's a lot of talk about Cayden Primeau lately, Jesse, and a lot of Habs fans have not been happy, especially after that Pittsburgh Penguins shellacking. For some reason, Habs fans decided to put the whole blame on Primeau. Yeah, he didn't look good, but I found it hard to say that whole game was on him. But he definitely didn't look comfortable, even when he came in relief. And to be fair, he hadn't played in a week. It is what it is. But there's a lot of fans talking about, look, it's time to move on. And there's one Habs insider, Stu Cowan, who you know from the Montreal Gazette, and I will link this article down below. Same thing with the Eric Engels article. Go check them out down below. Go read their articles. He had some interesting comments on a recent mailbag. He said, I think the clock is running. Now, the ... represents skips in the article, as you can see if you go to read it, but this is the gist of it. I think the clock is running out on Primeau with the Canadiens. The only reason Kent Hughes kept Primeau with the Habs last year was because he was convinced another NHL team would claim Primeau on waivers. We talked about that a lot. But he said, since I can't imagine Primeau still being with the Canadiens next season, I think it's time to give Dobes or Hughes a shot in the NHL. And no, he's not talking about Kent Hughes. I think we all know that. He is talking about Connor Hughes. As Jesse, if we look at that Laval goaltending situation this year, Connor Hughes and Jakub Dobes, both with near identical stats, which is kind of crazy to look at, almost completely identical across the board. 2.55 GAA, a 904 and a 906 save percentage, respectively. They've looked great. And at this point, I don't even know if a team would claim Primeau. Maybe they would. He's still kind of young for a goalie, Jesse. But as we've mentioned, like, I think this just depends on where Montreal's brass sees this team going this year. Are they content with letting this just ride out, this kind of being that last season, and really trying to do something for next year? Or do they want to start establishing a winning culture now? Is that a priority? And if it is, I think Stu might just be onto something. Shake something up.
That time isn't over completely yet for Cayden Primeau in Montreal, but it's getting close. We know, Josh, that if he has a couple more starts and he's not getting that outing that we kind of are looking for from him, that ice is just going to get that much thinner, because we know we want him to succeed, Cayden Primeau, but that 4.7, GAA right now is looking pretty tough right now. Obviously, like, he knows it, and that's the big thing kind of going forward. The big question is like, the Laval Rocket have been doing really good. So if, like, we're bringing Dobes up, that's kind of changing that tandem, which has been a big part of Laval Rocket's success. The point is going to be for Kent Hughes and when he really wants to start, really prioritizing Montreal. We are in that rebuild, but obviously you'd have to feel like the Montreal Canadiens do come first, even though you want the team to develop well in Laval. It's really that balancing act right now. Like, Kent Hughes wants Cayden Primeau to play well so that he can really have Dobes kind of cook it and help the Laval Rocket right now. But you have to feel, Josh, like, if there's a couple more games here where Primeau is not having the best outing, I would not be surprised to see Jakub Dobes have a start in the Montreal Canadiens crease as soon as this season.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks with that, and I think you raised a great point on how this could disrupt the flow that is going on in Laval right now. Yeah, they lost their last game to Hartford in Connor Hughes, a very rare bad game from him, as he was pulled after letting in 3 goals and 11 shots, which is where Gavilan got his 27 minutes. Hughes was above a .910 save percentage going into that game, I believe, but still, like, if you waive Primeau and he does get claimed, then you're stuck. You just have Sam Montembeault, either Hughes or Dobes, whoever you call up, and then the other one left in Laval with just Luke Kavalin, who's mostly an ECHL goalie. Like, what do you do? Like, is that okay for Laval? Are you okay with that if you're Montreal? You lose a lot of goalie depth immediately, and you better hope that Jacob Fowler makes that leap next year, where you make another random Euro signing like they did with Connor Hughes this year, right? We just signed him off out of the Swiss League this offseason. So it's like, it'll disrupt Laval, who's been one of the best teams in the AHL. And are we even sure that Dobes or Hughes would be much better than Primeau in the NHL? Like, don't forget, Primeau had very similar stats to the ones you're looking at on your screen right now when he was in the AHL. There's a lot of questions, but I want to hear from you guys down below. Are you done with Primeau? Do you think calling up Hughes or Dobes potentially permanently for the rest of the season if Primeau gets claimed, do you think that's a good idea? Will it hurt Laval too much? Let us know your thoughts down below, because I think it's a really interesting dilemma. But let's move on, Jesse, to the final part of this video. And it's fun to get into some trade talk. And there are some guys that have been linked to Montreal here and there. But one guy that's name recently surfaced in an article from the Hockey News is, well, let's just get into it. So the first thing I want to get into here is an article from Russ Cohen that is also linked down below, highlighting how the Canadiens need goal scorers. He says Lundestrom may have more to give elsewhere. We're not going to talk about Lundestrom, because I don't think that makes any sense. But we're going to talk about 2 other guys, Jesse. We're going to talk first, though, about Frank Vatrano, just briefly, because he mentions that Frank Vatrano could be a trade target. He's not having a good season. He probably needs a change of scenery. He had 7 goals and 7 assists in 28 games so far, but he had 37 goals last year, and the year before he had 22. He's 30 years old. You need some veterans to play with the youngsters, and he's a UFA after this year, and he's only at a $3.6 million cap hit. And if we take a look at his stats here, Jesse, again, 7 goals, 7 assists for 14 points in 28 games this year, coming off 37 goals on the Ducks last year, 22 for them the year before. Fairly small cap hit. I think this also goes back to whether Kent Hughes believes Montreal should be competing now. Because if you go get a guy like Frank Vatrano, an expiring deal that I'm sure a lot of other teams are going to try and, get him as well, it probably won't cost you a first-round pick. Do you think it's worth giving up some later draft capital just to try and get a plug-and-play guy who we know can score some goals to see how it works for this team to maybe spark something? Or is that just not really worth it at all?
I don't mind paying even a little bit more if we just have the caveat that we know that we can actually re-sign a player like this, even if it's, on a little bit of a shorter term deal. Because the Montreal Canadiens do need goal scoring. Like, we do see, and there's the argument that, okay, we're going to have a lot of really good players that, could be in the top 6 for the Montreal Canadiens. I still see a lot of youth there, and I see the benefit of kind of balancing some things out, like having some vets there, making a trade, as long as you feel like you can have them more for probably than just this season, obviously on a pretty good deal, even on a little bit of an off year this year, still considering his output is very good. We have to remember with the Montreal Canadiens why I feel this way of getting a goal scorer, even if it is a little bit more of a vet, why I am open to this. We're 28th in the league in goal scoring. That 2.7 games, that's one of the biggest things that's really holding us back. And of course, like, there's a good chance that we finish around 28th in the league, not so coincidentally, if we don't get more of that goal scoring. Like, there's a direct correlation between how much goals you score in the NHL and where you finish. We're seeing that right now for the Montreal Canadiens. So I think that Kent Hughes would be wise to looking at a situation like this, but I wouldn't be surprised again if he's kind of thinking, okay, what's kind of the longer term implications of that as well?
Yeah, for sure. And but if you look at over his whole career too, like we say it's a down year, which it kind of is, but at $3.6-ish million, you're looking at a guy who's on pace for just over 20 goals, just over 20 assists.
Yeah.
Like, that's not nothing. That's very reasonable, right?
Pretty
and
good.
I don't know if Anaheim had retained anything, but last year, 37 goals, 22 and 81 the year before that, 10 and 49 is on pace for almost 20. 18 goals in 56 games, you're on pace for about 25, same the year before. So this guy's a 20 to 25 goal scorer with one outlier year. I don't think it's that bad an idea, right? It doesn't have to be him, but that idea to bring in a veteran goal scorer could really pay dividends if you see Montreal works for it. But there's another guy that was linked recently to the Montreal Canadiens, Jesse, that I think also maybe makes a little bit of sense. He's a younger guy, though, and that's Alex Turcotte. As PM Perron on Twitter said, Canadians should trade Jake Evans while he's hot. He won't keep producing at a 0.5 point per game rate. There are probably several clubs interested. LA's been mentioned in terms of Alex Turcotte. Now, this is not a report that LA has looked for Jake Evans in exchange for Alex Turcotte. This is just simply saying LA could benefit from a guy like Jake Evans, just like they benefited from Phil Deneau. Quick look into Turcotte, though, Jesse, is an interesting one. In a recent Athletic article, he said he's happy to finally be a full-time NHL player. 11 points in 25 games. He's a 23-year-old center, though he could probably play the wing as well. I know we're kind of sick of these talks about young guys, but if, for some reason, this is not a report or anything, but if you can get a 23-year-old center who's almost at a half point per game pace, the age of 23, in exchange for an unrestricted free agent, I think that could work. However, I'm just not sure the LA Kings are willing to give up on a guy who put up near point per game in the AHL last year quite yet for that price. But again, it's never that bad, especially if Montreal can move one of their expiring deals for a guy like this.
You could consider that positive asset management. There's a lot of people that feel that Kent Hughes will get rid of Jake Evans, Dvorak, and Armia for sure. There's some people that's just kind of a foregone conclusion. It's like, okay, what players are we bringing in? Is Kent Hughes kind of looking to see where he would kind of pivot from there? I think with Vatrano, you got a little bit more of a proven track record, but at the same time, Josh, like, you need to look into this. While I would pass on a Turcotte, you need to do your homework ahead of time on it, because once again, there is a reward there kind of compared to that risk, which isn't massive. And if you really feel that reward is greater than that risk that you're giving, you have to be tempted to maybe kind of look at something like that. Again, I think with kind of complicates this whole situation, which we really need to take in the picture, is all the prospects that we have, and obviously like those picks that are to kind of come in the future. If we didn't have so many prospects, I'd kind of be more likely to kind of take a little bit more of a flyer on somebody. But because I have some solid faith in a Beck, in a Kapanen when he kind of builds up, I kind of want to get those proven players and even kind of proves the point of those vets that kind of complement that influx of all the young players that are naturally coming with this team.
That's a great point too, right? So there's give and take with everything. There's risk and there's reward. I mean, we look back at that Lehkonen trade. At the time, it's like you get a draft pick and a pretty highly touted prospect from Justin Barron. Did it work out? Not as much as we would like, but sometimes those trades do work out. I mean, you look at, this is a much bigger scale, but the Minnesota Wild, who gave up Kevin Fiala, and in return, the big piece was Brock Faber, who was a fairly highly touted prospect, but not near the level of prospect that he turned out to be. Like, he just kind of all of a sudden jumped on the scene and was one of the better defensemen in the entire league. Like, that doesn't happen very often. It's very rare that happens, but you never really know. So there's always a bit of risk and reward. You got to let Kent Hughes, you got to let our boy cook.
Someone cooked here.
And so that's the thing. So when you're looking around Montreal, you're looking around the players that they can move. There's going to be talks left and right for the whole rest of the season leading up to the trade deadline. But what do you guys think? If you can get a young prospect, doesn't have to be Turcotte, but someone similar, would you give up a kind of Jake Evans for that? I know we want to keep him around, but you got to look at the asset management side as well, whether he might leave in free agency. There's a ton of factors. Can't get into them all here. Leave your thoughts down below. That'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Only half of you. You made it to this point, you might as well hit the button, because clearly you enjoy what you watch it. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.